Good morning.
Yes, sir, in the last class uh, about the observability, you
Hmm.
have told that we have calculated that x, we can calculate that x by just differentiating the value of y
Hmm.
uh, in n minus 1 times. So,
Hmm.
sir, earlier you have said that it's very difficult to get those values exactly by differentiation. Means we are bound to avoid that differentiation. So, why we are doing that differentiation here to get the value of x?
Well, you can differentiate. I mean, if you have y of t, you can differentiate it. There is no problem because you have y of t available to you. You can look around the neighborhood of that particular instant of time and obtain how y is changing in that neighborhood, and from that estimate y the higher powers of y. Sorry, higher derivatives of y. The reason it is discouraged in practice is that if you differentiate a signal, the noise content of that signal will increase. Okay, so any measurement, so this is a practical consideration, not a theoretical consideration. From a practical perspective, if you have a signal, invariably there will also be some noise that will be riding on top of the actual signal. Okay, measurement noise. Okay, so this noise, when you differentiate a signal with with noise also contained in that signal, that act of differentiation will make that noise content larger, because noise is varying rapidly. When I take the derivative of that with respect to time, that becomes a very large number. So the noise will become very large in practice. Okay, that is why we sought a different way to estimate y dot instead of directly differentiating it, and that was how we went about making the observer and so on. Okay, but if you consider the ideal situation where there is no noise in your signal, which was the kind of situation we considered last time to understand the theoretical limits to our ability to reconstruct the state, then it's, I mean, you can go ahead and differentiate it. So if there is absolutely no noise in the signal, then there's nothing preventing us from differentiating the signal and not worrying about the effect of noise. Okay.
Okay, sir. Sure.
Yeah.
And sir, one
Oh.
more thing,
Huh.
that x cap you have
Huh.
calculated
Yes.
by the observer. So, sir, that x cap, so means
Huh.
initially the value of the x and x cap are different. You have said na, though both of them having same, sorry, different initial condition, right?
Correct.
So
Yes.
to get means to reach the same value of that, means exact value of that,
Huh.
that will that time affect the system? Means it will take some time to get the very close to x, right? X cap very
Correct.
close to x.
Correct. So what when you ask will it affect the system, I assume you're asking will it affect the stability of the system, because this since you do not have x available to you, you have to use x cap for performing your state feedback. Okay, but now since x cap and x are not identical for some time in the beginning, your concern is what will happen to the overall dynamic system, because I wanted to feed x cap, I wanted to feed x, but I'm now feeding something different, x cap. That's your question, right?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Correct. So if you look back on the discussion that we had 2 lectures back, I talked about this principle called as a separation principle. Okay, what the separation principle states is that even though there may be some difference in between x and x cap, the overall dynamics of the state estimator and the state feedback controller will have its poles simply being the union of the poles of the estimator alone and the controller and the feedback control system alone. Okay, so what this means therefore is that I don't need to worry about the dynamic system becoming unstable or whatever as a consequence of feeding x cap instead of x. Okay, definitely the dynamics will be slightly different for the first some length of time that it takes for x cap to start tracking x, but the system will not become unstable. Okay, so it will still have the same very similar dynamics as what it had earlier. Okay, the poles of that feedback system will still be the same as whatever they were if I had somehow been able to provide x itself as my feedback, as my state feedback instead of x cap. Okay.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So we will get started now. So I have no particular announcements. Subhadeep, can you please lower your hand? I think you're. Thank you. Yes. So I have no particular announcements. I have sent this homework, and it is due 2 Wednesdays from now. But next Wednesday again, I will send another homework, as I said, which will be due another 2 weeks later. So hopefully, between them, they will be able to get you to practice many of the questions that might likely come up in the midterm, and so on and so forth. And I've also sent lecture notes for 18 and 19. And in the course of this week, I hope to send lecture notes for a few more lectures also. So they will all trickle out one by one, because I've had to, juggle other professional responsibilities along with making notes. I've not been able to send it to you as promptly as I would have liked to. So with this, let me start today's lecture. So I assume all of you are seeing my sheet of paper. I shall go ahead with the assumption that it is now visible. Okay. So the topic for today's lecture is feedback control, a system's perspective. Okay. So let us, before we talk about that, let us recap what we discussed in the previous lecture. So we discussed that the state space representation of a dynamic system is not unique. I can undertake a coordinate transformation, and with that coordinate transformation, the appearance of the A matrix and the B matrix and the C matrix will all change. I will therefore end up with an appearance that doesn't allow me to exercise my intuition in certain important matters, such as those of controllability and observability. So state space representation is not unique. Okay. Then the second thing is, therefore, if I'm given an unfamiliar representation, how do I judge whether that dynamic system which has been given to me is controllable and observable? So what do we mean by controllable? I defined it last time. So at any point in time t, starting from t equal to 0, let us say at some time t, I want the state vector to assume a certain value. Okay. Then I should be able to apply inputs u of t between 0 time t equal to 0 and that particular instant of time, such that the state vector is driven to that particular desired location. Okay. If I'm able to do that, regardless of what state vector I pick, then I can consider my system to be controllable. Not, and otherwise not. Okay. So given this definition of controllability, we noted that there is a simple test to confirm that a system is a necessary condition for the system to be controllable, and that was to ensure that the controllability matrix had rank n. So we defined a controllability matrix gamma c. Okay, which was of this kind: gamma c is equal to b, ab, etc., a power n minus 1 b. So this was the matrix, and we noted that this was n times mn. That was, it's not a square matrix. So the rank of this matrix can at most be equal to n, and it was necessary for it to be equal to n for me to be able to fully control my system, or for my system to be fully controllable. Okay. So this was one thing that we discovered. And then if the system was not controllable, we came up with a way whereby we could partition the states into those which are controllable and those which are not. So we defined this matrix TC, which was a juxtaposition of the column vectors of the controllability matrix, which were linearly independent, and a set of other column vectors which were linearly independent from TC1, but otherwise had no connection with the controllability matrix. So if I apply this transformation, that x is equal to x1 is equal to TC times x, then I end up with a new appearance for the state equation, which demonstrates that a certain set of states x12, we called it x12, was uncontrollable. Okay. So next was observability. So in a similar manner, we wanted to establish observability of our physical system without actually having to rely on our intuitive understanding of the physics of the problem. And to do that, we noticed that there was a matrix called as the observability matrix gamma O, which is given to be C, Ca, etc. up to Ca power n minus 1. It is called the observability matrix. Okay, and so if the observability matrix, again, this matrix did not have a rank, n. Sorry, it is not. This is also not a square matrix. It's in general a rectangular matrix. Okay, so we noticed that this also this would have a size of mn by n, I think. So this has to have a rank n for it to for the system to be fully observable, or in other words, for me to use the output y of the system to fully reconstruct the state vector x. Okay, so that was a necessary condition. Then in a similar manner as what we did for controllability, we sought to separate out, in case our system was not fully observable, we wanted to separate out or partition our state equation into two parts, one which was observable and another which was not observable. And I tried to develop the transformation correctly for that. It turned out that I was on the right track except at one location. So the step, as I discussed, was to make an observability matrix TO, where you have some first k rows being the linearly independent rows of gamma O. So this was TO1. I think that's what I probably called it last time. Just bear with me for a minute so that I am consistent with the symbols that I am using. Yeah, I called it TO1. Then the remaining rows, I pad up the remaining rows, n minus k rows, with vectors, row vectors that are linearly independent from TO1 and have nothing to do with the elements of gamma O in any way. Okay, so this is TO2. Okay, then it turns out that this transformation x1 is equal to TO times x will cast the state equation in a form which will separate out the observable part from the unobservable part. In particular, the appearance will look something like this. Okay, x11 dot x12 dot is equal to a11 0, a21 a22, x11 x12 plus b11 b12 u, and y is equal to c11 0, x11 x12. How it manages to transform this equation, the original state equation, into this form, if the states if some states are not observable, if the system is not fully observable, is going to be discussed in the notes. Okay, so how do we conclude that this is not observable? You notice that x11 dot is equal to a11 x1 plus b11 u. Okay, x12 dot is equal to a21 x11 plus a22 x12 plus b12 u. Okay, so you notice that what you are able to measure is only x11, because y is simply equal to c11 x11. Okay, but the dynamics of x11 has no connection with x12. So x12 is not featured in the dynamics of x11 and does not affect x11. So if I measure x11 alone, so these are like two completely unconnected systems. Okay, if I measure x11 alone, there is no way I can extract x12 from that measurement, because the dynamics of x11 has no connection with x12. This is similar to the dynamics of the first pendulum having no connection with that of the second pendulum in the example that we considered earlier. So therefore, we see that the state x12 is not observable, and we have succeeded in separating out the observable states from the unobservable states. Okay, so any questions about this material? Okay, so We shall now start on today's topic. As I said, feedback control, a system's perspective. Okay, so we shall return to those niggling problems that we were haunted by when we tried to survey how successful we were with the control strategies that we had developed up to a certain point, maybe a lecture or two back. So we had already done state estimation, we had done computer torque, we had discovered computer torque technique and so on, and we felt with those two we are like the masters of the universe. We can take on any control problem that is thrown our way. But then there were several humbling realizations. One of them was that our system might be of a diseased kind. In other words, it may be not controllable or not observable or both. Okay, and we came up with further. We investigated those particular maladies a little further and came up with tests, namely of the controllability matrix and the observability matrix, for determining whether the states are observable or not, or controllable or not. So we did that, but then there were a few other problems which we did not take up. Okay, so of the many things that were still outside the ambit of what could be accomplished with the control strategies that we had discussed, there were two that were particularly significant. I think they were indexed 2 and 3. So one of them was that we cannot apply feedback linearization if the model of the system is not known very well. And the second was that we cannot apply feedback linearization. So I mentioned feedback linearization particularly because it allowed us to control a very general plant, a very general system, right, which had this m times q double dot plus c times q dot plus g of q is equal to tau. That relationship we discussed was could encompass a huge variety of mechanical systems with masses, springs, dampers, and rigid bodies interconnected in various ways and so on and so forth. So it looked like that was all that we needed to control any mechanical system that we were interested to control. But then there was this humbling realization that some of the assumptions that went into developing that control law and implementing it might not always might not always hold. So one such situation was that the model of the system is not known very well. And we talked about how a robot which is trying to pick up a part might not know the inertia of the part, its moment of inertia matrix or its mass and so on. So that will therefore completely derail our efforts to implement computed torque or feedback linearization. Okay. Similarly, we cannot apply feedback linearization if the system experiences disturbance inputs. Okay, so we define disturbance inputs as inputs to the system which affect the output of the system, but over which we have no control. So I took the example of the car and talked about how we might not know aerodynamic forces, we might not know friction forces with respect to the road. So we cannot therefore control the car. Even if we are to apply, even if you know the model of the car very well, we may not be able to get its speed or its position to be controlled precisely as a consequence of these uncertainties that exist about the environment in which the car lives. Okay, so we can stick to this car example itself because it can actually encompass both these problems. Okay, so the disturbance is what we have already discussed. In terms of model also, we do not always know how many people will be inside the car. And even if we know how many people will be inside the car, we will not know what their weights are. Okay, so therefore there's always this uncertainty about the inertia of the car. Okay, how heavy is the car, given that there are going to be sometimes 3 passengers, sometimes 4 passengers, sometimes 2 passengers, sometimes some luggage alongside passengers, etc., etc. So there's already a that even the first condition is going to be valid for the case of a car, for the case of controlling of a car. Let us say I want to get it to move, at a certain speed or some such thing. Then there are all these uncertainties which prevent me, uncertainties about its model. I don't know its mass well enough, so I don't know what torque to apply to get it to move at a certain speed and to accelerate to a certain speed within a certain duration of time. And then even if I do that, there are all these external disturbances like wind drag and road friction that I have not taken into account, which will come in the way of me achieving my control objective. Okay, so these two still persist as problems for us to worry about. Okay, so it turns out that we are not the only engineers in the world who would be scratching our heads about how to control dynamic systems which are confronted with uncertainty. Okay, so maybe let us say you are mulling over this problem and you want to go have a cup of coffee because you don't know how to solve this problem. Okay, and in the coffee shop, maybe Prakriti of course is closed now, but whatever other restaurant you go to, you meet an aerospace engineer, and over a cup of coffee you discuss your problem with this person, and the aerospace engineer listens to you for a while and says, you know what, I am also confronted with a very similar problem. I want to design an autopilot for my aircraft. Okay, I want that airplane to fly in a certain, as per a certain trajectory, and with with certain speed at certain instants of time and so on and so forth. In other words, I want to fully control the flight of that aircraft, but I don't know the weight of the passengers of that aircraft, so I don't know the inertia of that aircraft well enough. Okay, how much baggage is contained in it, how many passengers there are. I don't know ahead of time. Sometimes there are many, sometimes there are very few. Likewise, I too experience wind gusts, so it's not possible for me to make sure that the attitude of that aircraft is controlled at all times, because I have these gusts of wind trying to blow it off course. So he too, or he or she, whoever that is therefore confronted with a very similar problem as the one that you are confronted with. The system may be different. It's an aircraft in that case. In the case of the aerospace engineer, it's a car in the case of the mechanical engineer. And when you both are sadly mulling over your respective plights, along comes an electrical engineer who maybe would have overheard part of your conversation and says, well, you know what, guys, I too face similar problems in electrical engineering. So let us say I'm a power engineer. Okay, I have variable loads. Okay, I have some people switching on their refrigerators and air conditioners all at once, and at other times all these devices are switched off. But yet I'm tasked with the responsibility to make sure that the frequency of that signal, of the power that reaches them, is exactly 50 hertz. The amplitude is exactly 220 volts or whatever. And if these numbers are not met, then all these systems go bust. They catch fire sometimes if there are voltage spikes, and if the frequency is not right, then certain other electrical elements don't work. Okay, so I too am confronted with this problem of uncertainty. Okay, I want to maintain the frequency and amplitude of the AC signal, AC power that I provide to my consumers, the same, a constant, but I have to do it in the face of uncertainty about how they use this power. Sometimes they all are using it at the same time, at other times they are all switched it off. But despite these huge variations in load, I have to have these parameters maintained the same. And along comes now a chemical engineer, and he, having overheard this animated and a depressing discussion about the problems of the mechanical engineer, the aerospace engineer, and the electrical engineer, decides that he has to jump in, because this person also is confronted with very similar problems. A chemical engineer is maybe trying to make a chemical reactor, okay, maybe trying to synthesize some chemicals or something, and he has to maintain the pressure and temperature within that reactor the same, because otherwise the chemical reaction will proceed in a different direction at a different rate, and so on and so forth. So sometimes it is possible for this person to do it, but at other times it is not. So if it's an exothermic reaction, the heat has to be removed, and the pressure might change because of some vapors collecting, and so on and so forth. So this person also therefore completely sympathizes with the other three engineers. Okay, in that this person also is confronted with uh, getting something to happen, controlling something, but in the face of uncertainty. Okay, in this particular case, it could be either the pressure or the temperature or some other variable that might fluctuate and might affect that chemical reaction, or maybe even the concentration of the reagents that have been mixed at the outset for the reaction to happen. Okay, so as all of these four engineers, and there can be many others. Okay, this is a very general problem. Okay, that every engineer has to encounter, but you expect that it probably is unique to a unique problem that afflicts engineers. But then along comes a biologist, after overhearing all of this, and the biologist also shares his sob story. Okay, you see, look at a biological system, look at mankind. Okay, he lives through summer, he lives through winter, he or she, I'm sorry. Okay, in summer the temperatures are sweltering, it can go to 35 degrees, 40 degrees centigrade. In winter it can go to sub-zero, or if you are in warmer climates it can go to 5 degrees or 10 degrees. But yet somehow the human body is able to maintain the temperature within itself at more or less a constant value of around 37 degrees centigrade. How does that happen? I don't know. Similarly, if I look at the blood sugar levels, okay, I might eat very sugary food now. I might eat food that has very little sugar in it at some later point. But within a very short period of time, the body somehow makes sure that the sugar concentration in the blood is brought back to whatever it was before consumption of this sugar-rich food. So I'm puzzled how this happens, because this is at the heart of the existence of life on this planet. You cannot count on Mother Earth to give you a very balmy 25 degrees centigrade temperature at all times of the year. Temperatures change, there is drought, the humidity changes. Every single physical parameter that you can think of undergoes change over the course of a year and over the course of many years. So if there is life on this planet, it is because Mother Nature has invented ways for the natural systems to withstand these changes in the outside environment. So despite the uncertainty that exists outside of that physical system or the biological system, this biological system can function quite well. In fact, the success of mammals over reptiles stems from the fact that we can keep our temperatures the same regardless of where we are, mammals and birds. So we are therefore able to colonize parts of the earth which are off limits for reptiles. For example, the polar ice caps and so on, because the temperatures there are so low that reptiles cannot simply keep their bodies running for any length of time. And in very cold temperatures near the Arctic, reptiles have to hibernate or go underground and wait out the winter season. Okay, whereas birds and mammals have no such constraints. They can stay active. So the biologist therefore also realizes the centrality of this magical ability for biological systems to stay, to retain their internal state, okay, regardless of what the external ambient looks like. So regardless of the uncertainty that the the plant or the animal is confronted with. Okay, so therefore the reason I'm sort of giving you this anecdote is to point out that this problem of being able to control a system regardless of the external environment, or in the face of uncertainties about the external environment or about the uncertainties about its own model, is cross-disciplinary. It is not confined to mechanical engineers alone. Okay, so it is something that afflicts various fields, and fields as different from engineering as biology. So now, while all these different people are putting their heads together and sorrowfully contemplating their sad situation of not being able to understand this, along comes a mathematician. Okay, so the mathematician sort of looks at all of this and realizes, firstly, that all these problems can be expressed in the language of mathematics. Okay, so the problem of the mechanical engineer can be modeled by using Lagrangian formalism. Okay, we can come up with a dynamic equation and we can forget about the physical appearance of that system. I can forget the physical appearance of a car once I have captured the dynamics of the car by means of my Lagrange formalism. Okay, likewise, the aerospace engineer can also provide to the mathematician a dynamic model of their system. An electrical engineer will provide an electrical model, which is once again a mathematical model. So if they apply Ohm's law and Kirchhoff's law and other such principles that they swear by, Kirchhoff's voltage law, current law, and so on and so forth, there will be another differential equation that the electrical engineer would come up with to explain the behavior of his electrical network. And same is true for the chemical engineer. So there are reaction kinetics which govern the way concentrations change with time, concentrations change with temperature, etc., etc. So what the mathematician realizes, therefore, is that there is a job for him here, him or her. Okay, all these people are grappling with problems in their own particular domains, but all these problems can be understood, can be modeled effectively using a language that a mathematician is very comfortable with. Okay, and that language generally is one of differential equations. Okay, they all obey differential equations of one kind or another. Okay, of course, some of the equations may be partial differential equations. So the mechanical engineer might not have rigid bodies as part of his or her system, but might have flexible bodies, in which case you need to use Euler-Bernoulli beam equation or some such thing to model the deformations. But nevertheless, they can all be captured by mathematics. Okay, so the mathematician therefore proposes to this group of people an idea to tackle their general problems. The mathematician says, okay, I understand differential equations. I might not understand how an aircraft works and so on. I might not understand how a car is built and what a car comprises, but you give me this dynamic model of the car. You give me the equation that the car obeys. When I press the gas pedal, how does the car accelerate as a function of time? There's a differential equation that governs that. Give me that. Likewise, he or she demands similar mathematical models from all the other fields as well. And then the mathematician would say, look, since I know something about differential equations, let us say I come up with a way to control, systems that obey these differential equations. Okay, a general way. Then that same control strategy, which is going to be another mathematical equation, can be applied to each and every one of your disciplines, regardless of the physical appearance of the system that we are trying to control. So that is the mathematician's proposal. So the mathematician says, let us remove the physical appearance of the system out of the picture. Let us just focus on its mathematical structure. Okay, you give me the mathematical structure, I will use my knowledge, my intuition, and my intelligence to develop another mathematical equation which will help you realize a certain mathematical objective, namely to control a certain variable, to regulate a certain variable, or whatever else. Okay, now what that variable could be is domain specific. To the chemical engineer, that variable could be temperature or pressure. To the mechanical engineer, that variable could be speed. To the aerospace engineer, that variable could be the height of the aircraft, whatever that is. You just have to interpret the mathematical result correctly based on the domain in which you are working. And therefore, I will be able to, in one shot, solve all of your problems. So this is the proposal that the mathematician comes up with. Okay, and this proposal essentially lays the foundation for what is known as system theory. Okay, so you are not concerned about the physical appearance of a system, but instead you are focused on its mathematical structure and coming up with a control law, as it is called, to achieve a certain result for the output of this mathematical system. Okay. So let us see how this can be done. So the end result is of course very useful and welcomed by all these people, because let us say a mechanical engineer has a mass spring damper system, and the mathematician comes up with a way to control a system that can be modeled as a mass spring and a damper connected to one another. That same control law, with some minor reinterpretation, can also be applied by an electrical engineer who has an inductor capacitor resistor system. Because at the level of mathematics, the differential equations connecting the input voltage to the output current, or the voltage across one of these other electrical elements, is not any different from the mathematical equation connecting the force I'm applying on the mass to maybe the displacement of the mass or the stretching of the spring or whatever else. Okay, so therefore systems theory is a cross-disciplinary theory, is cross-disciplinary subject. Okay, it is different and opposite of what is often called as interdisciplinary subject. What does interdisciplinarity mean? It means that many experts from different areas have to come together to create something new. Okay. A cross-disciplinary subject, on the other hand, is one where you create something, okay, but that is applicable to a wide variety of areas. Okay, with minimal reinterpretation, it can be applied to a variety of areas. Okay, so system theory, therefore, is a cross-disciplinary subject. I just use the mathematical structure of the system and then come up with a control law in order to get the system to do my bidding, but the mathematical system to do my bidding. But this would be of great interest to the mechanical engineer, to the aerospace engineer, electrical engineer, chemical engineer, even the biologist, sometimes even economists. Okay. So one of the important ways in which the mathematician can address the problems of these multitude of disciplines is by using feedback control. Okay, so feedback control is a cross-disciplinary subject, and for reasons that I talked about just now, mathematics is its language. Okay, so in what remains of this course, we will be sort of distancing ourselves from mechanical engineering, in the sense that whatever we would discuss doesn't need to bring to our mind a car or an airplane or any such thing. It can be applied equally well to a chemical plant, to a an electrical circuit, and so on and so forth. Okay, so any questions about this, the interdisciplinary nature of the feedback problem or the control problem? Okay, so having discussed that the physical appearance is not important, we shall focus only on the mathematical structure of the problem. Okay, so if the mechanical engineer were asked to cast his or her problem through a simple schematic, probably that schematic would look something like this. Okay, so they would probably represent a system by a rectangular block. This system could be a car or whatever other system that they are interested to control. Okay, there is a handle, they have a way to control it. Okay, they can control the throttle valve of their engine or something else, and there is a variable that they are interested to control, which we shall call as y. Okay, and there is some possibly dynamic mapping between the control effort, as this is called, that the engineer can apply, and the output, as it is called. So this is the output and this is the control effort. Okay, there's a certain dynamic relationship which is specific to the domain in which the problem is being considered. Okay, for a as I said, for a mechanical engineer, Lagrangian formalism will give a differential equation that relates the output of that system to the input torque. So in this case, if it is a velocity, there will be a differential equation that relates the velocity to the torque, or the throttle angle or whatever. Okay, if it's a chemical engineer, the output could be the concentration of a certain chemical coming out of his or her reactor, and the input could be something else. Okay, so on and so forth. Now this is partially this partially captures the system that they're concerned about, and this system also experiences extraneous inputs. So air drag, friction, etc. These are called disturbances. Okay, so this is at its most general and abstract level, the kind of representation that we can come up with for problems that bug all these different people from various different fields. So there is an output or a signal that someone is interested in. It could be velocity, it could be height, it could be concentration, it could be pressure, temperature, whatever. And there is a way to control that. Okay, and there is a certain dynamic relationship between the two, which is captured by this F, this mapping F. Okay, and then there are disturbances. Now in the face of these disturbances and in the face of uncertainty about F, if the mass is unknown, I don't know the dynamic mapping very well, right? Because I don't know that mass matrix well enough, and so on and so forth. So in the face of uncertainty in F and in the face of disturbances which I may or may not be able to measure, I still want my system to dance to my tunes. I still want the output that I desire for that system. I still want the velocity to go from 0 to 60 kilometers per hour, in 3 seconds or 10 seconds or whatever, regardless of my ignorance about the wind speed or the road friction conditions. How do I do that? Okay, that comes within the ambit of feedback control. So these two problems, in fact, motivated development of feedback control, how to get systems to work in the face of uncertainty. So how do we do it? First, we shall take a step back and look at how it is done when there is no uncertainty. Okay, so I have a physical system. In future, we shall give this physical system a name. Okay, because it could refer to a car to a mechanical engineer, an electrical circuit to an electrical engineer, etc., etc. I cannot give it a specific name which is unique to a particular domain. Okay, I have to give a general name as a systems theorist. I have to give it a general name, and this name is chosen to be a plant. This is called as a plant. Okay, the system that I'm trying to control is called as a plant. Why a plant of all things? I don't know. Okay, it could possibly have some connection with industrial plants, etc., in which these systems were widely deployed earlier, and that name has stuck. Okay, so the system you are trying to control in all future lectures shall be called as a plant. Okay, the system has a set of inputs U and set of outputs Y. So signals that you are interested in or keeping tabs on. Okay, and these are the things that you can control. So in case of the aircraft, the inputs you could include, for example, our the signals we apply to our ailerons and rudder and so on and so forth. So it could also include the fuel that I send to my engine and all of that. Okay, so this is the plant, and there is some possibly dynamic mapping between the input and the output. Okay, now in every single one of these cases, I want the output Y to track a certain reference signal R. Okay, what would it be? Since this can easily become very abstract, it is useful to remind ourselves what exactly we are talking about. So what would be the reference signal for a automobile engineer? That person might want the car to reach 60 kilometers per hour and stay at 60 kilometers per hour for all future time. So reference signal for the automobile engineer therefore will be something, the velocity being a constant value of 60 kilometers per hour. So that reference is at 60 kilometers per hour. That's the constant that the automobile engineer wishes to maintain a constant. Okay. Similarly, the chemical engineer would want to maintain the pressure a constant, or the temperature to be a constant, in spite of whatever the chemical reaction might be trying to do to the pressure or the temperature. Okay, so such problems where we are trying to maintain something a constant, okay, such problems, such control problems are called as regulator problems, for obvious reasons. The meaning of the word regulator itself reveals why these problems are called regulator problems. But then there are other problems where I want the dynamic system to dance to my tunes. I don't want it to stay put at a certain value regardless of what happens. So even the biological system's temperature being at 37 degrees despite whatever outside temperature there might be is a regulator problem. So the brain has to somehow figure out how to get rid of excess heat or how to pump in heat in order to make sure that the temperature inside the body remains the same. Okay, so these are all regulator problems. So this is one kind of problem that a systems theorist would have to solve. The other kind of problem is one where the system has to dance to my tunes. So if I take a robotic manipulator, I want a part to be picked up and placed somewhere. So this reference, therefore, will be the trajectory that I'm providing and the waveforms that I'm providing along the XYZ axis, the Cartesian coordinates. I want it to go from point A to point B in a certain manner. It should accelerate at a certain rate to start with, reach a certain peak velocity, maintain that peak velocity, and maybe the directions also have to be changed along way, etc., before landing at the final destination. Okay, so here this reference is maybe it will have three components. There will be a separate reference along the x-axis, along the y-axis, along the z-axis. How the x coordinate of the end effector, y coordinate, and z coordinate have to change with time. Okay, so this is a time varying reference. It's not a constant that needs to be maintained. It's not something that needs to be maintained constant. An aerospace engineer will probably have a similar time varying reference. They would want their aircraft autopilot to rise up to a certain altitude within a certain period of time according to a certain profile. Okay, and then maintain that attitude and then come back down, etc., So those references are also functions of time. Okay, so those control problems where I want that output y to dance to a time varying reference, such problems are called as servo mechanism problems. Okay, so these are the two kinds of problems that the systems theorist has to address. Now, any questions?
Sir, I'm Dinesh, sir.
Dinesh,
this servo control is same thing, sir. This when reference is varying with the time, that we are calling servo control something.
Servo control is intended to solve the servo mechanism problem. Yes.
Okay, sir.
So, how would we go about doing this? Now, the most simple way is also evident here. Okay, if I want y to be equal to r and I have to insert here a mathematical equation which gets y to be equal to r, what equation should I put here? A mathematical relationship, more than an equation, a mathematical relationship that gets y to be equal to r. What should I do? If you think for a moment, what you really need to do is you have to invert this mapping between the input and the output. So I have to come up with a mathematical equation that inverts the mapping that exists for the actual physical system between its input, the control effort, and the output of the system. This is what I have to do. Okay. If I'm only concerned if there are no disturbances and so on, and if I know the plant model very well, okay, this captures practically every control problem that there is in the world. Okay, we are always trying to invert the dynamic model of a plant. But if you think that this is all that there is to control and we can all go home now, you are deluded, because the devil is in the details. Why should this be F inverse? You can clearly see, right? Because if this is F inverse, okay, how do I implement this finally? If let us say the mathematician were to give me this particular function, I use a computer to implement this particular relationship. Okay, so I have to have u is equal to F inverse of R, and therefore y will be equal to f of F inverse of R, or in other words, it will be equal to R. Okay, so I have to invert the dynamic relationship for me to control the plant. Okay, now sometimes it is possible to invert it, okay, without too much trouble. And one important class of problems are ones where our plants are stable and we do not have external disturbances affecting the plants, and we know the model of the plants very well. Okay, this particular happy state of affairs was confronted or was looked at by us a few lectures back. Okay, and we developed something called as open loop control for implementing our control objective. Okay, we defined what our X desired was, if you remember, and we applied a certain U desired. Based on this X desired, we calculated how, so what U desired had to satisfy, right? We had to have some B times U desired was equal to X desired dot minus of A times X desired, or some such thing. We had an equation of that kind, and then we applied our U desired as per this equation. Okay, so this kind of control is called as open loop control. Okay, and this is one of the simplest things that you can do in order to achieve your control objective. The control objective is always the same for all people. It is to get the output to, you know, dance to your tunes, or in other words, to track a certain reference. That reference could be a constant signal, as it would be for the case of pressure regulation, temperature regulation, speed regulation, etc., or could be a time varying signal for tracking problems. Okay, this is open loop control. But if you think that this is all that there is to it, as I said, you are deluded, because there could be disturbances that affect the system. So let us say there's a disturbance. Usually what we try to do when we model the system is that the disturbances could affect the system all over. For example, the aerodynamic drag is a distributed force. Every square inch of your car will experience aerodynamic drag. Okay, and each such square inch will respond in its own particular way. But then, to simplify modeling, we assume that this entire drag that the car is experiencing can be replaced by a single force that is applied at a single location. Okay, so such assumptions allow us to apply these disturbances either at the input alone or at the output alone. So this is a simplification in the modeling that we do in order to make the problem more tractable. Okay, so suppose therefore that I have my dynamic system which is experiencing what we call as an output disturbance. It's at the output of the system. Okay, this is D. Now I want to implement my I want the output actually to track my desired reference, R of T. In the presence of this disturbance, how do I do it? Okay, if I can measure this disturbance, so this circle indicates a summation junction. Okay, so I am adding two signals pictorially here by using this symbol. I'm representing the addition by means of the circle. Okay, so if let us say there is this disturbance, how do I still get the system to track Y? So I take the reference R, okay, and I add this disturbance but with negative sign here, and then I pass it. If I can measure the disturbance, if I have information about the disturbance, this is what I can do. Okay, because if I now pass it through this thing, I will get that U, the control effort, will be equal to F inverse of R minus D. Okay, and therefore what I would have as Y is equal to F of F inverse of R minus D plus D, and I'll get R as the output. Okay, so I can get the output to track my reference when I'm able, even in the presence of a disturbance, if I'm able to measure that disturbance. Okay, but the two problems that we discussed at the outset are problems that defy both these situations. So how can I invert the plant when I do not know the plant structure very well, when I have uncertainty about the plant's dynamics? How do I invert the model of a robot when I do not know the mass matrix of that robot? Okay, or how do I cancel out the disturbance, for example, air drag or friction from the road or whatever, when I cannot, with my skill and within my limitations of resources, model them properly? How can I get rid of these effects? This is, so it looks like a almost intractable problem, but feedback control is this magical technique that allows us to solve these problems. Okay. So first, before we solve these problems where there are uncertainties with the model and external disturbances, let us consider slightly more mundane examples where this simple technique still fails, even if I know the functional relationship, even if I know the mapping between the input and the output for the dynamic system, it may not be possible for me to invert it. Okay, so let us say I have a nonlinear dynamic relationship between the input and the output. Okay, I may not be able to use open loop control in the manner that I did. So if you see here, this is a linear system. I could easily compute UD given xt. Okay, but I may not be fortunate enough to do such a thing for a non-linear system where maybe there's a differential equation on the left hand side as well in terms of the input u. Okay, so in such cases, straightforward inversion, even if I know the plant model well, even if there are no disturbances, is not possible. So before we take on, therefore, the more general problem of inverting a plant in the face of uncertainty and disturbance, let us try to come up with an alternate and a fairly clever way of inverting a plant in situations where it cannot be formally inverted. Okay, I gave the example of a nonlinear. For example, if I have x double dot plus k of x times x is equal to u dot plus some other function of x times u and so on, or maybe some other nonlinear function of u times u and so on. How do I come up, even if I know what I desire? Okay, I have a differential equation that u has to obey in order for me to get the state x or the output x to dance to my tunes. And the differential equation, I may not be able to solve it. Okay, so I will not know ahead of time what control effort to apply in order for the output of the system, or not x double dot, sorry, y double dot, for the output of the system to be whatever I want it to be. Okay, any questions about this scenario? So before we take up the more challenging scenario where we have uncertainty in F and uncertainty about the environment in the form of D, let us try to find a way to invert the plant when we cannot formally invert it properly. Okay, come up with an approximate inverse that will work well for the engineer, if not an exact inverse. What the mathematician prescribes is an exact inverse. Let us try to come up with an approximate inverse. Okay, and here is a clever way to do it. So I have my dynamic system here. There's the input u and the output y, and there is a mapping between the input and the output. Now what I do is I create a copy of this dynamics in a computer. Okay, this is in a way analogous to the state observer arguments that we did, although the direction that we would take here is slightly different. And the goal also is slightly different. The state observer just wanted to observe the states. Here we want to actually invert the plant and therefore control the plant here. Okay, so I come up with a model which hopefully approximates the model of the approximates the actual dynamic relationship between the input and output very well. Okay, this is realized in a computer. Okay, and I provide it with the same input u. Okay, so if the initial conditions are the same and so on, the output z that I get out of my computer will be identical to the output y. Okay, now what I do is I take this output, okay, and I compare it with what it ought to be, and what it ought to be is told by me by my reference signal r of t. And if there's any error between the two, so if there's any error between r of t and z of t, then I manipulate that error E by means of a certain other mapping H. And then I provide that as the input to my plant. Okay, this is the way I attempt to invert the plant. Now, why this roundabout way? We will talk. I mean, it's hard to justify how someone came up with this roundabout way. I think it is. It did not. Nobody realized this in one shot. People actually developed the technique to invert the plants, and then finally realized that it had this particular structure. Okay. So let us say this is the way I go about trying to obtain the inverse of f without actually physically computing its inverse. Okay. Let us say I try to do that. Then the question I need to ask is, what property should H have so that when I manipulate the error E through the mapping H, the output U is such that it's approximately the same as F inverse of R. Okay, what general property should H possess so that U is approximately equal to F inverse of R? Exact F inverse we decided we could not compute because of the structure of the dynamic relationship between U and Y. But can we at least approximately invert it so that at least for the kind of R of t that we are interested in, our plant ends up dancing to our tunes? I'm able to generate the control effort U that gets the output Y to very nearly be the same as R. Okay, what general property should H possess for that to happen? Let us undertake a little bit of algebra to discover the general property. Not a lot of algebra, just a small bit. So you discover here that U is the output of this block, right? So it's H of E, where E is the error, which is given by R minus Z. Dinesh has a question. Yes.
Sir, this computer model output with the reference signal, how this error has come, sir? Because these both are ideal systems, sir. Computer model and the reference signal. Sir, you have taken Z output and with the reference signal, which error is there. So reference signal is our ideal as we desired things. And this computer model also will work with the same, sir. No? There is no disturbances. How this error has come?
No. Even if there are no disturbances,
yes, sir,
I cannot get my dynamic system to do my bidding if I cannot invert its dynamics. So I'm considering a situation where in order to get R to be equal to Y, I need to have an F inverse block here. Suppose I cannot physically implement or realize that F inverse block. Okay, I gave an example of a nonlinear differential equation where such an inversion is not possible, not straightforward. Right. So for example, I told you, right? So x double dot plus something times x, maybe even a constant x, is equal to u dot times u, let us say, plus u square or some such thing. Even if I know what x desired is, okay, I still have to solve a very difficult differential equation to obtain u. I'm just making up this example, okay? So this is an example where I know the model very well. There are no disturbances, but still I cannot invert the plant model. Okay. Now, in such a situation, how do I obtain an approximate inverse without actually implementing the inverse of the plant model? That's what I'm trying to do. Okay. Yeah. So to do that, I have come up with this. I've introduced this new block H here. So a new mapping between the control effort and the error. What should H look like for it to approximately invert the plant model? That's the question that I'm looking to answer. So what is H? HU, therefore HE is R minus Z. And we know that Z is the output of my computer's model, which is going to be equal to F cap of U. Right? So F cap hopefully models our plant very well. So F cap and F are very nearly the same. Okay, the dynamic the mapping between input and output that I have realized in my computer faithfully reproduces the mapping between input and output of the actual physical system. Okay, so from this equation, I see that U is equal to F cap inverse of Z, and that's equal to F cap inverse of R minus H cap inverse R minus what is Z? Z is R minus E, right? So Z is R minus E, and therefore this is F cap inverse of R minus E. So this is equal to F cap inverse of R minus H cap inverse of U, because E is H of U. Sorry, H of E is U. So E is therefore H inverse of U. Okay. Any questions about this algebraic manipulation? Okay. So U therefore is F cap inverse of R minus H cap inverse of U. Okay. Now, ideally, if I wanted to invert my input, what should my U, invert my dynamics? Sorry, what should U have to be? I know that U has to be equal to F inverse of R. What I have managed to accomplish with this, interconnection is not F inverse of R, but instead F cap inverse of R minus H cap inverse of U. Okay, so now I ask myself, under what conditions will the approximate inverse that I have succeeded in implementing be nearly the same as the exact inverse? When will that nearly be the same? I have to compare these two expressions. These two expressions have to nearly be the same. So I have F cap inverse here and I have F inverse here. So I need to have F cap to be very nearly the same as F. So, or in other words, my computer model should be very nearly the same as the actual physical systems dynamic model. Okay, there should be no uncertainty in the modeling of the physical system, which is likely to be the case because we assume that we knew the system very well. So that error between the computer model and the physical systems model, let us assume, is small. So that's one prerequisite which can be taken care. What is the next condition? I have here as the input argument R, and there I have R minus H cap inverse of U. Now, under what conditions will these two be nearly the same? Do you agree with me that they will be nearly the same when this H, sorry, not H cap, this H, I don't know why I'm calling this H cap, it's just H. Okay, H inverse of U, this quantity is much less than R. Do you agree with me about that? So when this quantity H inverse of U is much less than R, then I will get R minus H inverse of U to be very nearly the same as R. So what does this tell me about the general properties of this mapping H? U is the output of H and E is the input to H. So what this indicates therefore is that if I have, so the mapping H should be such that if I provide some input to it, okay, the output should be much larger than the input. Okay, because E is equal to H inverse of U, right? If E is very small, okay, so if the input to my mapping H is very small, then compared to the output, then that kind of a mapping can help me get R minus H inverse of U to be very nearly the same as R. Okay, so in other words, what we need to note as the general desire for the general property that H should satisfy is that H should be what is known as a high gain function. So if the function takes some input, in this case E, the output of that function should be much larger than the input. Okay, when that happens, then I will be able to make this term here very small and get U to be approximately the same as F inverse of R. Okay, F inverse of R is my general recipe. This is what I need to implement to get my dynamic system to do my bidding. But how do I get that to happen? I get that to happen by coming up with a function, a mapping h, which greatly amplifies its input and provides that as the and the output of that is provided to my physical system as the control effort. Any questions about this? Okay, so crucially also note that this h, this function h or this mapping h need not have anything to do with the plant that I'm trying to control. See, if I had to somehow bring in f here in determining h, then again I'm in a quandary, because if I have to, I may or may not be able to realize f inverse and so on and so forth. Here I'm not bringing in h at all, f at all, the actual dynamic relationship that the plant has. This can be practically any high gain function. Okay, but what do I mean by a high gain function? The notion of a gain is understood very well by the electrical engineering community, not so well by the mechanical engineers probably. So when I say a gain, it is the ratio of the output to the input. That's called a gain. Okay, so for me to approximately invert the plant dynamics without actually doing it, I have to implement, this is one way forward, where I choose this mapping that manipulates the error to be a high gain function. Okay. So this solves the problem provided I know f, right? Provided I know f, so that I can create a corresponding copy f cap in my computer. But suppose now I don't know f. I still want to invert f, but I don't know f. What do I do? In addition, there may be disturbances, which we shall get to after taking looking at this first problem. If I don't know f, but I still want to invert it, how do I do it? Okay, to do that, what you do is, if I don't know f, you agree with me that I cannot implement f cap. Okay, I will not be, whatever comes out of this will not be an accurate replica of what the plant is going to output when I provide it a certain input, because I don't know the dynamics very well. I may not know the mass of my car very well, so I cannot predict how much it will accelerate when I provide a certain torque. Okay, so the f cap is not known very well, but still I want to invert f in the presence of this uncertainty. So what do I do? What I do is a very simple thing, and which is something that you have already come across. Instead of taking the variable z, which depends on f cap, I directly tap into the variable y. Okay, of course, this looks very easy for a mathematician to recommend, but what this means in practice is I have to attach a sensor to the output of my physical system. I have to have a way to measure the speed of my vehicle. I have to have a way to measure the height of my aircraft, or the pressure inside a chemical reactor, or a temperature inside that, or whatever else. I need to invest in a sensor. Okay, if I invest in a sensor, I don't need to create this computer model. Okay, instead what I can do is I can directly take the plant's output. So f, there is u here, and there is y. I measure y, so this is a measurement, and then compare it with the reference r, which is what I want y to be. Okay, and any error between the two is manipulated by this high gain mapping, and that is fed as the input to my plant. Okay, now this strategy of controlling a plant, okay, you need not control a plant by using sensor outputs, but if you use sensor outputs and manipulate the error between the sensor output and the actual desired output, and manipulate the input to the plant by looking at the error between the desired output and the actual output, then this style of control, this type of control, is called feedback control. Okay, so I can invert this, essentially this part here, which I'm circling here. This behaves like an approximate F inverse. Okay, so a high gain function, operating on the error between the desired output and the actual output, and providing its output as the input to my plant as a control effort. That operation behaves like approximately inverting this dynamic relationship, which I may not even know precisely. Okay, so the feedback control, strategy can take down at least one of the problems that we outlined in the beginning, namely that second problem. Wait a minute, I'll just show. So if you do not know the model of the system very well, but yet you want the system to dance to your tunes, how do you do it? And here's the way to do it. Okay, use the sensor readout and compute the error and pass that error through a high gain operator, something that produces a very high output compared to the input, and that high gain block need not have any connection with the actual plant's model. Okay, this is called feedback control. Now it turns out that the feedback control architecture can also address that final problem that remains. So let us say I have disturbances which affect my system. So in the previous case, let us say I had disturbances in the in this problem here, where I knew the model of the plant very well, and let us say I could measure that disturbance. Then I could take that measurement and feed that same measurement also to my dynamic model in the computer, and then still realize our desired objective of getting y of t to be equal to r of t. I can still do that. Okay, but suppose I cannot measure d of t. I do not know what its value would be. You notice that directly taking that output y also will include the effect of d. Okay, and therefore I can cancel that effect even without actually measuring d. Okay, so the feedback control architecture is therefore a silver bullet, in the sense that even if I don't know f, and even if I cannot measure d, I can still invert my plant and cancel the disturbance and get the output to track the reference r. Okay, so this is a high gain function. So this, however, this silver bullet, as I called, however, demands that you invest in sensors. The reason we did not take up this at the outset was because sensors are expensive, and they come with all sorts of other issues. There will be sensor drift, there will be sensor noise, etc., etc. And sometimes if the temperatures and pressures are very high, you may not even have an appropriate sensor to make those measurements properly. So to the extent possible, we wanted to avoid investing in a sensor. But when circumstances become dire, as it would be when I don't know the plant model very well, or when I don't know the disturbances very well, but I still want to get the output of my plant to track my reference. I still want the car to go at 60 kilometers per hour, even though I may not know air drag, or even I don't know friction, etc. I invest in a speed sensor, measure that speed, compare it with the reference speed, and operate on that error by means of a high gain function. The issue, however, with doing this is the stability of this feedback system. And that is something that we will look at later on. But at the heart of what an engineer desires, is to get r of t to be equal to y of t. And that can be accomplished by means of a high gain function. And this is the recommendation that a mathematician would give to any of the other disciplines that they would talk to in connection with addressing the problems of control of dynamic systems, whose structure is not very known very well, or whose model is uncertain, and whose environment is also uncertain. Okay. In fact, this strategy was first developed in the context of telephony. This was in 1920s. Okay. By this engineer in Bell Labs by name H.S. Black. H.S. Black or H.W. Black, I'm not sure. Okay. So he developed what is known as the negative feedback amplifier. So let me just briefly discuss the nature of the problem that prompted him, that motivated him to develop this negative feedback amplifier. So in those days, in the early days of telephony, of course, people understood the importance and the significance of telephony, but you had to have these amplifiers to, amplify that voice signal every so many kilometers. You needed to have some amplifiers to amplify and boost up the power of that voice signal, because it tended to get attenuated with distance. Now, each of these amplifiers, they were made with all these vacuum tubes and so on. They were highly nonlinear devices. Okay, so they ended up distorting the voice signal substantially. That was one problem. The second problem was they were also subject to crosstalk. So if there were two nearby electrical lines, each of them carrying signals related to voice signals from two neighboring households, let us say, then it was possible for one amplifier to amplify a part of the other signal also. So at the other end, while you want to call your mother, your mother will not only hear you, but also will hear your neighbor. So that was the way the situation was. Part of the conversation would be from that of your neighboring house. So that's called crosstalk. So there was a problem of nonlinearity, okay, and crosstalk. And the exact amplification ratio also could not be decided very well. So there was uncertainty about how much each amplifier could amplify as well. And a lot of research had been invested in improving the performance of these vacuum tube based repeater amplifiers, as they were called, but without much success. Okay, there were severe fundamental hardware limitations which prevented repeatability, reproducibility, and linearity in the way these repeater amplifiers could amplify the signals, the voice signals that they were supposed to transmit from one end to another. Okay, from the transmitter to the receiver. So it was at this point that Harold Black came up with this idea of wrapping a tiny feedback circuit around each amplifier. So he had this amplifier which had a certain gain K, and he took a small fraction of that signal, maybe 10% or 1% or whatever, and then fed that back, and then applied this to the feedback amplifier, applied this error between what you wanted that amplifier to amplify and what it's actually amplifying. He fed it back to the amplifier. Okay, and this, I think he also probably manipulated this by means of using another gain K. I don't remember now. Okay, some just as this high gain function was used in this example, he also probably used a similar high gain function there, some other amplifier to do that. Okay, now this ended up not only almost completely eliminating crosstalk because its disturbances could be greatly attenuated, but also ended up achieving the almost the exact desired amplification ratio for every single one of these stages. Okay, so this negative feedback amplifier therefore actually made telephony practical and possible. Otherwise, there would be no telephony. Okay, it is sort of unheralded hero of this our modern world. Okay, and he actually discovered this principle of feedback. That's why it's called as a negative feedback amplifier. Okay, so the output is fed back in negative sign, and then compared with whatever you wanted the amplifier to amplify, and then you are appropriately providing the input to the amplifier based on that error. Okay, so he came across this. He developed this entire thing when he was traveling to work. So he was going on a ferry. I think he was in New York somewhere, and he was going on a ferry crossing that river. I think it's the Hudson River or something. I don't know which river flows past New York. And in one shot, he got this result. And then very quickly, he tried to file for a patent. But this strategy of solving this problem was so revolutionary. It was so far ahead of its times that the patent examiners were unconvinced that he had done something that was physically realistic, physically possible. So they thought that he had done some magic, there were all these so-called perpetual motion machines. So the patent examiners kept having to review patents in relation to perpetual motion machines, which I think violate many laws of thermodynamics. Okay, so they're unphysical. So they were under the view, they were of the view that whatever he had proposed was also in the same of the same kind, an unphysical, unrealizable entity, idea. Okay, so they took a long time to grant him the patent, but unfortunately for him, the patent was granted eventually, and negative feedback amplifier became the mainstay of telephony. So earlier, you could probably have a few lines in a telephone exchange, but as a consequence of the ability of this negative feedback amplifier to cancel crosstalk and to ensure linearity in operation, you could have several thousand lines in a telephone exchange, all operating in parallel. Okay, this was something that was unheard of in those days, and that was made possible by feedback control. Okay, so what we shall do in the next class is continue along the same lines and see how this ability to contend with uncertainties in the plant model and in the disturbances can be extended for the kind of systems that other engineers who are interested in. Okay, we shall confine ourselves to problems where you have a single input and a single output, which is not which is a simplification of the more general problems that we have been looking at so far in this course, where you have multi-body systems and so on. But nevertheless, given the challenges associated with the problem that we are confronted with, it is best to start with a relatively simple situation where you have a plant with a single input and a single output, and it's experiencing disturbances. Its structure is not known very well, but you still want it to dance to your tunes. You want the output to either be regulated or you want it to change as function of time as per your wish. How do you do it? That's the that's the subject matter of feedback control. Actually, feedback control is a huge area by itself, and what I would be discussing in the next 3-4 lectures is, I'll just give you a small flavor of what is possible by using feedback principles. Already you have seen a bit of it. We were able to use feedback principles to stabilize dynamic systems and to implement feedback linearization. The power and scope, however, of feedback control is far bigger than that. The two problems that I talked about, the outstanding problems that I started the class with, can also be taken down by using feedback control. How do we do that? Will be the topic of our next class. Thank you. So are there any questions? Okay, so if there are no questions, then I shall log off at this point. Thanks a lot.